Welcome to 2020 Politics War Room with James Carville. I'm Al Hunt here in Washington, self-isolating. James Carville is doing the same thing out in Virginia. Usually we're at the American University studio with our partners, the Science Institute, but because of this pandemic, everybody is staying home. I hope all listeners will do the same. Please be safe. Hope you can listen to our podcast, but don't go out unless you absolutely have to. This week, we have our first repeat guest, whom we'll introduce in just a moment. But please subscribe to 2020 Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. James, are you feeling okay?
Well, I mean, physically, I guess I feel okay, but mentally, I'm not very okay at all. I mean, you're watching what's happening, watching what's happening in New Orleans, watching what's happening around the country. And these are just disturbing times, really disturbing times.
It is, and it's not going to get any better. It's certainly going to get worse before it gets better, and we only can hope that, by sometime in late May or early June, it is peaked, and that it doesn't come back. But this is. I don't think I've ever seen a threat like this. I wasn't old enough to remember World War II, but this is something like we've never experienced before, James.
I agree, and it's and every time you read something that the actually knowledge that does not make you feel any better. The only thing that does is I'm betting that the world of science surprise us on the upside as to how fast they come up with something. That was a terrific article. And I guess it's in the Times. I'm not sure. I forget where I read it about how there's no boundaries. All the Chinese scientists, the U.S., the European, everybody is working together, and they're really working on this thing.
Well, that's I think that's one bit of good news, but it's going to take a while. And the great fear, as I say, is that this comes back, and I hope they can find some kind of vaccine before that. James, our guest today is David Shribman, one of the greatest journalists of this or almost any other era. He was a terrific Washington reporter. I had the great joy of working with him. Wasn't always a joy for him, I'm sure. Went on to head the Boston Globe Bureau here, and then for almost 20 years was the best regional newspaper editor in America. He took the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette during incredibly difficult times to become far and away the best paper in Pennsylvania and really one of the best regional papers in America. But David is really an interesting guest today because up until last week, he has been in Canada teaching up in Montreal, just came back to Pittsburgh about a week ago. David, the Canadians are only a little bit more than 1/10 as big as the United States, but this virus has hit everywhere. How did the Canadians handle this, or how have they been handling it?
Well, I think it started slowly, but it certainly accelerated very, very fast. And it was done personally by the Prime Minister and by his extremely able Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who many of your listeners will remember was an important journalist for the Financial Times and others, and is now the Deputy Prime Minister and probably will be Prime Minister within the next decade. And they handled it, the two of them handled it with great grace and with great compassion and great feeling. And that's what struck me is the Prime Minister himself, as you know, Al and James, his wife, until this week, was a COVID-19 sufferer. They had to stay in the Rideau cottage where they live. And he self-isolated himself along with his wife and 3 kids. And he's just extended his self-isolation for another 2 weeks. But every day he would come out and stand on the porch and on the steps there and talk to reporters and by extension to the Canadian people. And he was very calming. He was stern in that he made it clear that this was a very serious, world-changing, country-changing event, but in both French and English, interchangeably, really. He went from one to the other seamlessly. He offered, hope and companionship, I would say. And he would talk about how he's taking his kids were doing Legos and his wife was on the phone with her friends and how the Trudeau family was getting through all of this. And but he made it clear that this was very serious business. And I have to say, Montreal right now, where we lived, is the hotspot for coronavirus right now. Many more cases than we have here in Pittsburgh, a city of about the same size. When we left, there was nobody on the streets. We drove through to the United States on virtually empty highways. People are very, very serious there about staying indoors. There's none of this negotiating about what the meaning of this is.
Let me interrupt just for a second to provide the scope. I mean, there have been, I think, about 8,700 cases in Canada, or less than 5% of what we've had in the United States. A little over 100 deaths. We've had over 4,000. It does suggest that they did something either earlier or better than we did. And there's been some bickering here between the governors and the president and others. There's certainly political divisions in Canada, but did the various provinces and the various local governors and chiefs work well with the central government? Was there the same kind of tension that exists in America?
There is tension between the ruling Liberal Party and Trudeau and Ottawa, but I think that there was not the kind of tension we have here. And a lot of the credit there goes to Chrystia Freeland, whose remit includes dealing with the provinces and the provincial premiers. So that's the difference in the situation here. Yeah.
So how much trouble did you have getting back into the country? Was it? We came
the day after they supposedly closed the border, James, but we went on the New York State Champlain border station. There were 10 automobile bays. 9 of them were closed, and we were the only car at that one. The guy looked at me. I'm a dual citizen, but I was traveling on my U.S. passport, and not the Canadian one. And he looked at the passport for 1 second, and he looked off the board and said something like, "This stinks," and go ahead. So it took about maybe 80 seconds, not even that much.
I don't know what, but I would have thought it would have been something more. It would have been a more vigorous response. But.
Well, I thought they would take our temperature, order us to quarantine for 14 days. You know, the Canadians on the other side are far more strict about this. If you go into Canada from the United States, you have to self-quarantine for 14 days, no matter whether you're in great shape or not. I have a cousin who lives just across the border. She's a Canadian citizen, but lives just across the border on a green card in Newport Center, Vermont. And she, if she goes to see her mother, who's 103 years old, she has to stay in her apartment for 14 days before she ventures out. There's no similar thing on the other side. Let me add one more thing, James. There's a lot of concern in Canada about Americans because our rate is so much higher. Our president is so controversial there. He's really loathed in a way that even never Trumpers here can't imagine. And they really don't want Americans over there right now because they feel they're contagious, that their leadership has been lax, and that they pose a danger to Canadians.
Well, they're right.
Well, probably, yes. Yeah, probably right, yes. But it's amazing. I mean, some of the most responsible voices you both may remember from Washington, Jeremy Kinsman, who was the top person in the Canadian embassy in our time there, and then later was Canadian ambassador to Russia and to Paris, France, and I think the European community. And he wrote a piece, asking questions about the American leadership and raising these questions.
Well, we spend a lot of wasted time with Trump saying we have to protect our borders, we have to keep people out, and what this has done. And actually, it's to some extent true in Mexico, too. They want to keep Americans out because of the way we have been so slow and so, handle this, at least compared to a place like Canada or Korea, so badly.
Yeah, it's really astonishing that the country that's supposed to have the best healthcare and the best scientists and the best experts be the country that is held in the lowest repute right now. And it's a very sad thing for all of us Americans who felt so strongly about our own national identity, our own sense of national purpose, and our ability, dating to colonial days, to be able to to rise through crisis, and to be able to, in the old New England notion that, smart handyman can fix anything. And we have all these handy people, and they're not fixing it.
You can easily figure out what's going on in the White House and what has been going on in the White House. It's the public health people, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Briggs, and maybe 3 or 4 sympathetic staffers have been pushing and pushing and pushing. And of course, the idiot caucus, the Larry Kudlow and Bart Laffer and whoever else that comes in and tells them something. And there was this titanic struggle, and according to the Times and Maggie Haberman and Peter Bacon, the sources are pristine, the thing that knocked him over to doing this was the fact that the public was demanding it. He thought the public was, because he was listening to people tell him that the public wants to open back up, when in fact that is not what the public wants to do.
No, I saw those polls today, James, and the public surely wants to be more careful than the White House wanted until at least partially this week. The public really understands this much better than we would have thought, than the president, I think, thinks.
Yes, but one of the things is the major media outlets, when he does something or he actually says something that is true or right, they should give him credit. Because what happens in the meeting is that he says, look, no matter what I do, these bastards are going to attack me. There's nothing that I can do that is right. Well, the truth of the matter is to 98% of the time, he's exactly right. I'm just saying, if somebody gives him a good story, that if Dr. Fauci can say, look at this, Mr. President, Times said that you did the right thing here.
Yeah, it would be useful from time to time. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for that, because the Times, well, you don't even need to finish the sentence. But, credit where credit is due. And this was a situation, I remember when Reagan was elected, and there was no bigger opponent, more partisan guy than Tip O'Neill. And he used to say, and part of it was bull and part of it was true, he says, I'm rooting for him to do a good job because I love this country. And I think that notion, I think there's some of that in the United States right now.
I think there is. But he deserves, one thing he does deserve credit for was shutting off any travel from China. It wasn't as dramatic and as quick and as soon as he suggests, but it was the right move. It was done January 31st. The problem was that he then spent the next 5 weeks downplaying the threat and not enacting the National Defense Production Act and not treating this as a crisis. But he does deserve credit for that initial response.
The Democrats have spent, and liberals have spent a whole lot of time criticizing the president for using too much presidential power. And now he's being criticized for using too little presidential power. So it is kind of an odd irony that I think historians are going to have to examine.
I thought on the China thing that the pilots actually refused to go because they knew what was going on the ground, so the airlines canceled. And of course, Trump had no choice but to issue the order because they wasn't going anyway. Is that my recollection?
That's true. There's a lot of truth to that. That's exactly right.
Okay, okay, but I'll still give him credit. I'll still give him credit.
One thing, the corollary to that is up until this time, he dominates the Republican Party. The Republican Party is his. It's far more than Reagan ever did. And Republicans almost across the board have been loath to take issue, criticize, because he is so egotistical, so insecure, so sensitive. But this time there are Republican, not so much in Congress, but Republican governors. Larry Hogan has been way out front on this and does not spare Trump from any criticism.
No, Larry Hogan. That's been very interesting. But don't forget, Larry Hogan thought about running against Trump.
Well, no, I'm not forgetting that, but I'm just saying they're being very open. Charlie Baker, Mike DeWine, who was a down-the-line old-fashioned Republican.
Yeah, that's right.
So Albert's search for the good Republican, this has yielded something out of the coronavirus. He's now got 3 Republicans he can talk about.
Well, you guys remember what David Broder used to say, Washington loves a moderate Republican.
Let me tell you what one of the huge aftermath is going to be, and I think you're going to see a story today, is the amount of corruption that is going to be going on within this $500 billion that Trump is trying not to have the IG oversee. And your country is going to, they're all on edge about corruption now. The corruption and the profiteering that is going on and will continue to go on during this public health crisis is going to be stunning. That's my prediction.
And the three of us are huge consumers of the airline industry. But do you have any doubt, James, that the airline industry is going to be as under huge scrutiny? I mean, it's
my God! And everybody that got a bailout, that guy Tim Wu pointed out, they made $7.6 billion in 2015, and it all went to stock buybacks and executive compensation. And the public is already outraged about corruption, but this is going to be unlike anything that you've ever seen. Stay tuned.
I agree it's going to be. It needn't be. It doesn't have to be. Whenever the government spends massive amounts of money quickly, there's always going to be some fraud. There's always going to be some waste. But let me go back to 2009. Let's give Joe Biden credit. They put out an awful lot of money in that stimulus package, not as much as they're going to put out now. And it was done very quickly. And boy, the Republicans were looking for, it was virtually, I'm exaggerating slightly, fraud-free. Biden did a terrific job doing that. And we know one of the guys who helped him do it, our old investigative reporter, Ed Pound, David. They really scrutinized. The problem with Trump is he doesn't want it to be fraud-free. He wants to reward people, and he wants to probably reward himself. And if you don't have a really tough, independent-minded inspector general, which I think we're not going to have, I think James is absolutely right. We're going to see fraud the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time.
Again, you're going to start seeing stories soon. I promise you, they're coming.
Yeah, they're definitely, no question about it. But I was stunned by how he attacked the General Motors chief executive officer. How he just eviscerated her, and it was very surprising to me. You don't see a Republican president doing that very often.
David Shribman, a no keener observer of American politics than you. You really weren't surprised. He attacks savagely anybody. And he particularly
I know, but it's just it's one of the bizarre turns of all this.
You don't think her agenda got him all stoked up? He seems to attack everybody, but he has a particular fondness for attacking females.
Well, and particularly one of Judy Woodruff's terrific colleagues, Miss Alcindor, who was a victim of a savage and gratuitous attack for doing her job in a noble way.
Well, if you look around in a crisis, we have to do all sorts of things that you wouldn't do ordinarily. You have to suspend some of the ordinary rules and norms. And when you have, a good leader, a responsible leader who believes in the rule of law, who believes in a democratic system, you survive some of those excesses. But Trump is much more like Viktor Orban of Hungary, and rather than treat it responsibly, he's going to treat it as an opportunity, and that's very, very scary.
Yeah, this cycle, I've always been sort of like, don't predict anything here. We don't know what's going to happen, and Jesus, don't we know? I mean, how this hits, my God, what's next? And I am not. I just get y'all's reaction. For some reason, I'm not remotely worried about the election. I'm worried about having the election in November. I'm not worried about winning the election. I think if we have an election and it is anything like a fair election, the Democrats are going to win so big it'll be stunning.
Well, we had elections in 1944. We had them in 1864, and we damn well better have one this time.
No, I agree. David, before we let you go, you've been back in Pittsburgh for about a week now. What's the difference among people? I know, no one goes out and does street interviews, but you watch the local news, you call people on the phone, you're talking to various people. What's the difference in attitude between Montreal and Pittsburgh on this crisis?
I guess the difference is that besides the difference that the Canadians have to be 2 meters apart and we have to be 6 feet, which gives them an extra 6 or 7 inches. The difference, I think, is the level of seriousness. But I will tell both of you guys that one of the Canadian news outlets said if you don't know what 2 meters is, basically it's the length of a hockey stick. That kind of advice isn't being given here.
So, David, this is one thing I think that we should have done as a country. Somebody should have made red, white, and blue victory sticks and put them out in front of the Walmarts and put them out in front of the Walgreens and put them out in front of, Costco. And you walk around with that victory stick, which says, it has patriotism. It says, you close to me, I'm going to hit you with this goddamn stick.
So we have these red, white, blue sticks. They say, don't tread near me. And we're going to, you, me, and Albert are going to make a fortune on those. And we'll dedicate it all to the food bank.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if somebody, somebody had production capacity, did that, shit, everybody, and you just put them out there and let people take them and walk around with your victory stick.
That's exactly right. That's right.
People, there's no, the lack of a non-governmental response to this on the communication level, I think it's been terrible. I mean, I don't know why these why they didn't go to these porn sites and say before somebody enters that site, you have to put a 30-second hand washing and distance message to them. The number of people that are porn sites in March, it was a betting market. It was the over-under was 3 billion. You want to reach people? That's how you reach people.
It's a reprise of the Victory Gardens of World War II. David Shribman, you have been a terrific guest.
Well, I hope you'll invite me back, and I'd love to do this someday at LSU so we can really see what a real university looks like.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you.
The corruption.
Tell me this, David. David, one final favor. Please ask your daughter, the rabbi, to say some extra prayers this week, okay?
We will do that. We will do that.
Love to your wife. Thank you, and stay safe. James, we used to have an old CNN show, which you'll remember, called Capital Gang. And at the end, every week we did the Outrage of the Week. And I miss it a lot of times. And I'm thinking now, if we had it these days, and the Outrage of the Week, Mark Shields and I would have to choose between 47 different things that Trump said. However, I think this week he's been topped. I think the most outrageous thing, and boy, that's a steep competition, was Mitch McConnell saying that basically this whole thing was the fault of impeachment, that the government would have moved faster and been more efficient if they hadn't been tied up with impeachment. That's a lie. Moscow Mitch should know that is an absolute lie. Impeachment didn't affect Homeland Security, didn't affect CDC, didn't affect FDA, didn't affect NIH. And basically the problem, and impeachment, by the way, was over February 4th. If the president had started to lead like a leader really should on February the 5th, give him a 2-week grace period, there would have been far fewer cases today and probably half as many deaths. So Mitch McConnell, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. But James, he has no shame, so he won't be.
No, I wouldn't worry about it. You don't have any shame. On the good news side, if Mitch McConnell knows this, if we get to an election, he will not be the majority leader.
Yeah.
All we got to do is we just got to get to November in a way that we can have an election on some kind of a level playing field or some kind of fairness. But I think that the Republicans are going to get slaughtered. And I'm told that there's people texting me this whole timeline of all the golf that Trump played and all the rallies that he went to during this. I mean, that's beyond a ludicrous assertion. Anybody read my friend John Chait, he methodically takes the entire argument apart. But look, one of the things is they're always going to have a defense. I mean, they're going to say something. They're just not going to sit there and allow themselves to get slaughtered. So they'll say this, and they'll come up with another defense. But at the end of the day, the weight of public opinion is just not going to be with him when this thing is over.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I am, as you know, for weeks, I have worried about not whether there'll be an election. I think it's very almost impossible to see how they can call off or even postpone the election, although New York did postpone 9/11 for a week or two. But I don't think that's the fear. My fear is that if this thing comes back in even a mild form in the fall, it's going to, a lot of people are going to be afraid to go to crowded gyms and crowded YMCAs and churches and vote, or stand in long lines as they had to in Texas and California and elsewhere. And of course, the answer is some kind of, considerably more money than the $400 million Congress appropriated for the states to try to set up systems to guard against that. Give a vote by mail option, allow a much more relaxed absentee and early voting. But you know who will stand in the way, James, and that's not going to happen. So if your state's run by a Republican governor, with the exception of the Larry Hogans, my new Republican hero, or Charlie Baker, it's going to be a problem. And the governor of Florida is a walking disaster.
It's going to be more than that. I mean, you look at the governor of Oklahoma, look at what they're doing in Texas. Of course, there's an actual study out that says when you factor everything in, the determinative factor is the party that the governor is from. It's like a 2.7 days quicker to implement social distancing. So, but it doesn't matter. They had a flawed theory of this. When it came out, they said, oh, it was just something, it was nothing, and then it was a hoax, and it was trying to hurt Trump, and nobody could do anything. And then every time that they do something, of course, as Dr. Fauci said, the virus has its own timetable. And now we're at the point, and been there for a few days, where the rates of infections in red states are increasing faster than they are in blue states. I mean, you're starting to see some signs that in Seattle and New York City, or even New Orleans, the infection rates there, the infection rates for the total of Louisiana are going up, but within New Orleans Parish and Jefferson, they're starting to go down. They're still high. You still have them, but the trend is in the right place.
Well, yeah, and look, it's just by nature of this disease and contact, this virus and the contacts that's required, it is going to affect heavily populated, congregated areas more than rural areas. It's just that's just inevitable. Rural areas are not going to be immune, and the red states that think that they aren't going to get hit as hard are in for a shock. Tennessee is getting really hit hard now, and what there ought to be. The problem is that 80% of Americans now are under some kind of stay-at-home order. It should be 100% right now, and there's only one place that can occur. That's the federal government.
Well, it doesn't look. It's just what it is. It's not. It doesn't work if everybody doesn't do it.
Well, that's why there ought to be a national stay-at-home mandate.
We all know that. Did not.
Well, we don't all know it because the national government hasn't done anything, and 20% of Americans aren't under a stay-at-home mandate.
I'm saying he hasn't done it. We know it should be done. But in the absence of that, I don't know what the hell the governor of Tennessee is thinking. The same thing as the idiot governor of Mississippi. And I'm just going through that guy's mind. So he preempted local people, like in Hancock County, where they ordered businesses shut down, and he on a statewide basis exempted them. Now, I don't think it matters that no one's going, but we'll see. Huh? I'm on a podcast, honey. I'll be off of it in a second.
Okay. This is what the stay-at-home orders do. Some complications. This is the first week in a long time we haven't done this from American University. Which is their fabulous president, Sylvia Burwell, has shut down the entire campus, as they should have. But James, did you do your class? Did you do a virtual class yesterday?
Yeah, I did. It actually, I don't know how the technologist got it. It actually worked pretty good. It's just kind of hard to sit and lecture, sitting in a chair, but it was fine. I did a lot of Q&A, and we did early on. I had an expert in public health This is, I think, like March the 10th, so 7th maybe it was, Tuesday, and we went through that, and then we did the law of geometric progression. So, I mean, at least they were pretty well warned, I think. Maybe not soon enough, but sooner than most.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I was surprised it worked as well as it did. We had what, 9 guests here at various times in Washington, 29 students from California to Massachusetts to Florida to Pennsylvania. For 2 hours and 40 minutes. I would have bored myself after 40 minutes, but fortunately we had a lot of participation, and it's not the same as being there. It's not as good, but it works, and I think people are adapting. My little 2-year-old grandson, they're going to start to do some online lessons from his daycare center. They're teaching him Spanish, and I think people can adapt. The problem, though, James, is there are lots of places in America, unfortunately, that don't have that option. I saw a piece on television this morning on Camden, New Jersey, where 98% of families live below the poverty line. They don't have connectivity. They can't be taught like that. And so, like a lot of things, the effects it's not going to affect the haves and have-nots the same. And the other problem I worry a lot about is I think the child and spousal abuse are going to increase a lot in this climate. But there's a lot of bad things going on. Let's just cling to your hope that the scientists will act with the great efficiency and speed that they have in the past. All right, be safe out there, and we will see you again next week. We want to thank everybody for tuning in to our weekly podcast. A little bit different this week, but it was still, I think David Shribman was a great guest, and it was good to have, and I hope that you will please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. This is Al Hunt for James Carville saying, everybody out there, stay home and be safe.